Coming up on the Branding Deep Dive podcast.
Yeah, I mean, this really is personal branding. Like, one, is your product valuable? Are you valuable as a candidate? Okay, can you then make the actual advertisement accurately demonstrate the value of your product as efficiently as possible? So you want to work on the actual advertisement and make it really good before you put it in front of anyone, right? Yeah. Then you can work on okay, how do I most efficiently get to the right people, to do advertisements?
Targeted. Yeah. It's literally.
Yeah. So really, and I think LinkedIn is the difference between targeted advertising versus let me just throw flyers everywhere, which is what online applications are. Let me just throw my flyer into people's mailboxes. An online application is just like a company's mailbox and people are throwing their applications in their mailbox. Do you really want to do that, or do you want to put it directly in front of someone's face? Mm-hmm. But again, you got to remember the actual advertisement and the actual product have to be good. So once you've set those things, you can kind of focus on that.
This is Ahmed Cheema, and welcome to the Branding Deep Dive podcast. If you're new here, this is a podcast where we have in-depth discussions about what brands are doing well to drive customer loyalty and how you can take those principles and apply them to your own brand. Today we're talking to Safwaan Mir. Safwaan has spent a lot of time thinking through and trying different career paths, and he has a lot to share from that journey. He recently went through a career change from data and analytics to product management and went through the whole recruiting process from start to finish with several big companies. In this episode, we dive deep into how to set yourself apart, how to connect with people on LinkedIn, and the role that brands play on your resume. If you're in the job market or are looking to make a career move and you're struggling to get your resume seen, this episode is a must listen. By the way, Safwaan is an old friend, so this episode may be a little bit more informal than what you're used to. Now, here's Safwaan Mir. Safwaan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Honored to be on your show. A longtime fan of Ahmed Cheema and his work, and have been a past collaborator and honored to be now a current collaborator.
Yeah, I normally when people are praising me, I'll cut them off, but I wanted to hear what you were going to say.
Yeah.
So thank you. For the audience that may not be familiar with who you are, what you do, can you give them a brief introduction? And then I would hope you'd kind of touch on, this podcast is going to be a little bit more informal because I know you as a friend, so the audience who's listening, they're going to be like, dude, this guy, what kind of, he's asking questions so unprofessionally, whatever, but since we know each other, it's going to be like that. If you don't touch on why it is that I brought you on, I'll make sure that I will touch on that a little bit. But yeah, can you give them an introduction?
Yeah, sure. So how about I start with how I know you? I went to undergrad with Cheema. We were in undergrad at the same time.
I'm getting scared. I feel like you're going to bring up some
me and Cheema, I was a frequently worked with Cheema on some of his films and other stuff that he was doing in his personal project. So Cheema is definitely a close friend. I've had a lot of good times doing things with him. Where else do you want me to go with this introduction? Do you want me to introduce why you brought me on, or
yes.
Do you want me to introduce?
That's kind of the purpose of introduction.
Right. So,
but since you brought that up, I did want to mention a story. The first project that we worked on that was a serious project together.
Oh yeah.
This guy, we had a deadline. Let's say we had 3 weeks or something to get.
Wait, hold on. Can I cut you off quickly? Cheema's definition of a serious project is an MSA skit. Okay, keep going.
Hey, look, we had a project that we had to deliver, and it was going to be presented, right? So that is, in my mind, that is serious in the sense that my name is attached to it, and it's going to be viewed by people. Mm-hmm. So we had this serious project, and of course, it is a comedy project. Don't get me wrong; it was for fun, but we have this. We spend a solid week working on the script. We create this whole plan and everything, and then every 5 minutes. Safwaan had a key role in the movie, and every 5 minutes he comes up, he's like, Cheema, this is stupid. I have a better idea. Do you remember what that was? What your idea was? You want to share it?
I do. I mean, no, I think it'd be funnier coming from you.
Every 5 minutes, this dude.
Not 5 minutes. This is maybe every
All right, that was a little bit of an exaggeration,
yeah,
but I want the audience to know that this was such a pain that I still remember to this day. This guy would come up with the same idea and pitch it over and over again in different ways. So sometimes he'd pull it off as if he had a new idea. So we'd be doing something, this, that, the other thing. they'd be like, oh shoot, I just had like a new idea, and you're like, okay, like maybe he actually has something good. Yeah. When you're on set, you got to be prepared for like a random idea that can change things and really take things to the next level. So I always listen, right?
Yeah.
Safwaan had the same idea every single time, and that was this. Here was his idea. Essentially, it was that, hey, we make this whole skit, and the ending is just, at the time, there was a John Cena thing that was going on.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that was?
I
still don't understand.
I think it was just like, it's like a punk thing, like, you know, where like you'd have the whole thing and you're expecting some crazy ending, and then it would just be John Cena.
Yeah, literally, like that trend was going at the time, and his idea was like, okay, like this scene is sick. What if we just like we did this like this way, that way, and then we just John Cena. It's just like every single time we're just like, Safwaan, dude, we need to get this done, man. Please just focus for a little bit. That was kind of how our relationship started, and that is kind of the story that I remember Safwaan by. And I hope his employers are not listening, because
thank you.
I think he has grown since then. But yeah, like let's talk about why you're on the podcast.
Yeah, so I currently work in product and data science. I did my undergrad again with Cheema in physics. I did a 1-year master's at the University of Michigan in business. After that, started working at Capital One. In their analyst development program. Did that for about a year before I started job searching, and really utilizing LinkedIn and a few other resources to make sure that I set myself up in the best position possible. And then, alhamdulillah, I was able to land a role at Current, which is a neobank startup in New York, which I'm really excited about. So Cheema wanted me to come on and talk a little bit about my process and about utilizing LinkedIn, and especially taking advantage of how hot the market is right now, and how much there is in terms of opportunity there.
Yeah, that's a great summary. I think let's start with, you said you were a physics background. Mm-hmm. How did you end up in product and data science in the first place? And then now you're in a product management role at Current, or you're going to be starting soon, inshallah. So walk me through that, right? Like, I don't know how many other physics undergrads that I know that are in the product management space. Maybe you know more, but
yeah. So I'm actually in product data science, so it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more purely focused on using analytics to make product decisions than having to do the actual execution, which PMs do more of. But I did interview for both product management and data science roles. So actually, you'd be surprised, but physics is actually a pretty common background for a lot of people who are in tech, and a very common background for people who are in data science and analytics. My manager is actually a PhD in physics. So,
really?
Yeah, a lot of the people that are in the data science space are physics PhDs, or they did physics, or they did something like that. It's a really transferable skill set.
Just because understanding the logic and stuff like that?
You do a lot of things mathematically that translate directly there, and I think a lot of physics is utilizing math to understand real world problems. Mm-hmm. I think more so than any other field. Math, if you're studying math, you really understand how to do math, right? But you don't necessarily understand the real world application as much. If you're doing other scientific fields, you don't really have like the mathematical rigor as much, whereas I think physics is the most transferable, like using very high level mathematics to make real world decisions and understand really big complex problems, which is really what I think data science and especially in the product space comes down to, right? You're trying to understand how to take and solve real world problems, and what product features and what product capabilities you want to build to solve those problems. That really is a very similar process. So how I actually got from physics to product data science, I think first to background, like how I even got to physics is kind of weird. Like Cheema knows, in undergrad, I think I had like 8 different majors at one point. Cycled through everything. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Kind of defaulted then to doing pre-med, because parents were paying for school, and it made sense to just do what they wanted me to do. Got to my senior year, and I chose physics because I did not want to take biology classes, and it was just a lot more efficient for me to do math. I was good at math. I was good at that analytical skill set, but I didn't really have any idea of like I had no interest in doing academia or doing a PhD or doing any of that, and still hadn't figured out what I wanted to do. I don't think it was until my senior year that I was like, I want to get into the business world and into like the corporate world and do that kind of thing. And specifically, I think I really started getting into economics, and I really started getting into trying to understand the overall economic system a lot more. There was a lot of interest there. So I started running between different options. Like I think senior year is when I was really like, what people are telling me in terms of my career, and just listening to the people around me that kind of view their vocation as just kind of independent of what they want to do. Like it's just a job. Like, most people when they're making their decisions about their career are making decisions like, am I going to have a good life? Am I going to make a lot of money? Is it easy enough for me to get there? And that's it, right? And am I going to enjoy the day-to-day? But that didn't really ever resonate with me because I have a very tough time putting up with BS, right? I have a very tough time putting up with like jumping through hoops. I think more tough time than most people do. Like I think a lot of people can do it, like they'll do it and then go through it, but like for me it's like hell. Like I have to have a really good reason to jump through hoops. So and for me, nothing, even when I was exploring careers, I didn't really have like some bigger reason. So I kept trying to find it. It wasn't working, and so I was just kind of like floating like just kind of like biding my time, treading water until I found something I really liked. And I think that's my senior year. I started doing a lot of research. It's like, okay, like how can I actually set myself up to have impact that that resonates with like who I want to be and what I want to become and like what I want to do. And then what I did was I started doing a lot of research into, and this is coincided with what I was doing my senior year in physics, started doing a lot of research into like wealth gaps and wealth curves and what causes huge distinctions between people who are really rich and people who are really poor, and like how these wealth gaps and wealth curves develop over time compared to like physics systems. So just a long summary short, things really go out of whack when, people have the capacity to save that normal people don't, right? So like if I can save more in any interaction that we do with each other, then I'm going to eventually, reach that exponential curve where you have a huge amount of wealth more than the normal person does. And there's a huge distinction there, and everything starts to go out of whack. I just became like really passionate about like, okay, this is amazing. This is like a big world problem. A lot of people are not thinking about solving it. Like I want to work on it. It's something I want to do. So I started looking like, okay, what's the most effective way to do it? Should I do a PhD in econ, which is something I was considering? Should I do, I guess that was like the big thing. Like, should I do a PhD in econ, go into academia? What else could I possibly do? Started talking to some of my professors, and they were like, you should go into industry. Like go into industry, work in the field, work there. And then after some time and you've built some skills, you can start to work on the problem directly. Because at the time I was like, okay, like maybe I'll go work for the World Bank, or maybe I'll go work for like a nonprofit or do something like that. But again, like I was sitting on a physics major with like no real world skills. Like I didn't know what to do. So I was like, okay, like I'm going to try and do consulting, right? All the research that I did was like, okay, like if you really have no idea how you want to apply your skill set or do anything yet, just do consulting, right? Do consulting, figure it out for 3 or 4 years, and then you can transition into almost anything and like, whatever industry you want, whatever impact you want. So I'm okay, like senior year, how am I going to get into consulting? Again, went down that rabbit hole, and I was like, okay, the thing that makes most sense is to do business school and then recruit for consulting after that. Applied, got into a few different schools, was deciding, and decided to go to U of M, just close to home, easy, and it was a year. So did that, and I started recruiting for consulting there, as well as working on some of the startup stuff that I'm currently trying to work on while I was there, learn as much as possible. While I was recruiting consulting, the Capital One opportunity also came up, and so Capital One basically recruits against a bunch of these consulting firms, and the reason is that it's just cheaper to have internal consultants than it is to hire external consultants. So I ended up doing a lot of the same work. And for me, when I was looking and weighing offers, it just made more sense, right? The life was a lot better. You're getting paid just as much. And I would be able to work on exactly what I wanted to work on, which is learning about the financial service industry. So it's kind of how I ended up there. And then there, I think I got lucky because a real consultant skill set, I don't think is as data oriented. It's a lot more, I guess, like big picture. Like they're both big picture, but it's a lot more, I guess, like soft skills in terms of just organizing slides and doing all of that. Whereas I did some of that as well, but I also got to get a little bit more technical in terms of what I wanted to do. I had a little bit more of that flexibility there, which combined with like the stuff I was doing in my physics undergrad anyway, we're doing a lot of data analytics type work, set me up well to be able to have the flexibility there to like recruit for product management or recruit for analytics types roles. And so ended up interviewing for both. And I will say that like early in your career, one thing that I've learned, and people told me, but I didn't really realize at the time, how important was to just put yourself in the position where you have the most flexibility, because you really don't know like where your skill set is going to go or where your skill set is really going to, push you to want to specialize in. So going to places where you have flexibility to work between job functions, between industries, all that kind of stuff. Depends what you want. Like if you don't know what industry you want to, consulting makes sense because you can go between industries. If you don't know what job function you want, it makes more sense to go into a role where like you have the flexibility to do product management, to do data science, to do pure corporate strategy, to do a bunch of different things. Because like when you're coming out of undergrad, most people don't have a very cursory understanding of what these roles even are and how they function. So you really it's a tough decision to say like I'm going to specialize right out of undergrad, right? You want to be more of like you get into the job function and you start to learn what you really like and what you're really good at and where you excel and where you're better, and then be able to specialize as you move on.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, sorry, I just kind of like went on for 20 minutes.
I think just to add on to that, like I was an information systems major.
Yeah.
And then like the jobs I've done since then have had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not like, I wasn't super passionate about it, and I'm interested, right? Mm-hmm. I'm someone that's like interested in a lot of things, right? Like, which is why we have this podcast even. I was laughing in there for a little bit, because you said you had a low tolerance for BS. And as you said that, I was reminded of all the BS you gave me. But
Cheema invited me on here to take shots at me for 40 minutes. That's it. You had no intention of actually...
No, I'm just kidding. I did want to... You mentioned the startup you're working on. Do you want to... Are you comfortable sharing what that is and what you're working on, or would you rather not talk about it?
So broadly, I think in Islamic finance, there's a lot less access to financial resources than in traditional finance even. And you're seeing that fintechs or financial technology companies are making it easier for everyone to access financial tools that you traditionally wouldn't have been able to access. So great example of that would be Robinhood made it easy for anybody to trade at any fractional amount with no fees, right? That's a huge thing, right? For any American to be able to trade, or anyone in the world technically to be able to trade, as long as they can have the compliance to be able to do that, to trade at no cost, no fees, and to be able to trade at fractional amounts, right? So that made financial resources more accessible to people. You see now with a lot of what cryptocurrencies are trying to do, they're trying to make safe financial tools available to everyone. What that inspired was, we're seeing this is a relatively recent thing. It's a past 10 years thing, and it's making traditional finance more accessible. If we're thinking about Islamic finance and just tools and resources that are compliant with Islamic laws, they're way less fungible, right? They're way more difficult to access. They're archaic. They're really tough for people to get their hands on. And if we look at Muslim countries in general, they're some of the least banked countries in the world. They're some of the least, the countries with the most struggle of actually accessing financial resources. If you think about stories of people actually just storing cash under their bed, probably most likely going to be a Muslim country. So
why is that?
Two reasons. One, we're pretty poor as countries, and poorer countries have less access to those financial resources in the first place. Secondly, a lot of Muslims are very harsh and strict in terms of like, we don't want to accept traditional financial systems coming in and spreading utilizing themselves in their country. So most Muslims are staunch. Like, we're not going to deal with banks that do interest, and we're not going to deal with banks that do that kind of thing.
And there's no good alternatives.
There's no good alternatives. There's not really real big, large scale Islamic financial institutions that are able to scale at the level of big banks, or even fintech companies that now are trying to scale at that level, right? So if Robinhood wanted to scale to all of these countries, they could do it, but then would Muslims be happy with trading with debt instruments and other type of instruments, and working with a company that isn't necessarily compliant with what they're trying to do, or what their restrictions are? So for that reason, it inspired us to be like, okay, let's take some of these things that are kind of at the cutting edge of financial technology and try and apply them to Islamic finance, and try and make specific Islamic finance tools more accessible. We were working on something very specific. I can go into it a little bit, which was we were trying to build a stable coin. This is probably going to be Chinese to some people, but we're trying to build a stable coin that was backed by Islamic bonds, or sukuk. We ran into a lot of problems doing it, because even the stablecoin market is just now. So this is 2 years ago.
What is a stablecoin?
So a stablecoin is any cryptocurrency that has a level of stability, right? It's not necessarily supposed to fluctuate in price a crazy amount. It's supposed to follow some sort of stable price narrative, whether it be a growth appreciation or stay the same price, that kind of thing. An example of stablecoins would be like Tether, right? It's your classic example of a stablecoin. DAO. These are kind of the big ones that you can think of right now, which are just pegged to the dollar, basically, right? Mm-hmm. So it's 1-to-1 to the dollar. It's going to be the price of the dollar. But what we were working on was a stablecoin, and probably you could consider it an investment token, right? So if you're backing a token with a basket of Islamic bonds, it's supposed to appreciate at the rate of those bonds. So all of that's really unimportant. What's really important is that what it was supposed to do is make it very easy for anyone in the entire world to access a safe and Islamically compliant investment mechanism, right? So these basket of bonds, right, you're tracking the market, are going to go up by like 3% a year. And if you can just hold those, right, you can transact in those. There you go. It's much better than a savings account. It's not going to crash, and it's not going to go through some crazy ups and downs, and you have a safe store of value for your money. So if you're looking at people that are in kind of situations where they're poor, they don't have a huge amount of wealth, they're able to save small amounts. You might be in a country where it's crazy hyperinflation and you can't deal with hyperinflation. What could you do currently? Like, you could buy Bitcoin, hold Bitcoin, you could try and transfer your cash into US dollars and hold US dollars. Or the alternative is you buy this asset, expect a 3% rate of return per year. It's a safe, Islamically compliant tool, and it's a better investment than Americans who are putting their money into bank accounts. It's a better investment than any of that.
So now there's a couple. I don't want to name drop because I don't want to get in trouble or anything like that. But there is a couple companies that are doing under the banner of Islamic finance, right? Mm-hmm. Are they not doing anything like this, or like, are they working on? I know there's like a mutual fund. There's mutual funds. There's ETFs that are quote unquote Islamic.
Yeah, those are all fine. This is the thing. ETFs and mutual funds are targeted at people who live in developed countries, right?
Oh, okay.
You can't invest in an ETF or mutual fund as some random person from Bangladesh, right? Mm-hmm. Can't invest in an ETF or a mutual fund.
Sorry to our Bangladeshi listeners.
Oh yeah, you can't invest in crypto either from Bangladesh. It's funny, but if you're living in the majority of these countries, not like you can go and invest in the U.S. Stock exchange. You can't. There's KYC laws. It's like very, very difficult for you to be able to go ahead and have access to those tools, right? Like me and you can access an ETF. Yeah. Me and you can access a mutual fund. This coin, or like what we were trying to do with this coin, wasn't really built for us, right? Mm. The whole point is, and this is kind of where crypto is trying to disrupt the market, is it's giving huge widespread access to hopefully anyone, right? Why do you think people in Venezuela or people in countries where their currency is hyperinflating overnight are flooding to Bitcoin? Why? Because their governments are blocking them from transferring their money into dollars or into any other asset. So they have to through side channels, transfer their money into Bitcoin and hold their wealth in Bitcoin because their currency is inflating overnight. Similarly, this would be like an alternative to that, right? And it would, the point is widespread access. Widespread access to a 3% rate of return would do two things. It would improve the amount of flow of money that we actually have into the Islamic financial system, and it would increase the validity and the creation of these Islamic bonds and cause that market to grow, while also potentially just spreading access like crazy. Because right now, to get an Islamic bond, you need like at least $2,000. What percentage of Muslims in the world have that kind of cash just sitting around? Also, you need to, they're like limited exchanges. Like, for example, like Britain, for example, does some Islamic bonds that they issue. And it's like an auction. Like, you have to come in and bid, do all this kind of stuff, and then it sells out. And you have no diversity there because you might be able to buy one. You can't buy a bunch of them. So we kind of take care of all of that we were hoping to take care of all that on the back end, spread out those tokens and do it. We have kind of, like, that was the initial idea. We've kind of transitioned from there. We just didn't think that it was realistic at the time, into a few other ideas that we're still working on and we're still kind of trying to come up with. But the big kind of goal that we had was, we want to take some of what we're learning in the tech industry and in the finance industry and what's happening on the cutting edge of fintech and be able to apply it to Islamic finance to make real Islamically compliant tools accessible to everyone.
Yeah, that's really cool. I was there's some questions that I had in that space, but it's not really the topic.
Yeah,
of the podcast.
This is like completely off of the LinkedIn thing.
Yeah, I was like, so let's bring it over to kind of what we were talking about. So the reason why I brought you on and asked you to come on is because you're someone that recently. So let me backtrack, right? So most people, when they're trying to apply for a job, they go on like LinkedIn, they go on whatever it may be, Indeed, right? And they look for jobs and then they submit their resume, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the statistics are, but it's probably like really bad in terms of like success rate, especially at large corporations, right? Like you have that filter that checks your resume for like keywords or whatever it may be. And then from there, like you're lucky to have like a recruiter look at it, right? Mm-hmm. And you're someone that in the last couple of months has had numerous interviews and numerous offers as well. So just wanted to pick your brain on what some best practices are for people that are in college or even people that are looking to make a career switch. How do you actually make sure that your resume is getting looked at in the first place? And then from there, we can talk about the actual interview process, how to do all of that. But let's start with, I know you're one of the few people I know that pay for LinkedIn Premium. Yeah. Right? So let's talk about that, right? Like, is LinkedIn how you're doing all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think LinkedIn's like a fantastic tool. You have even more than necessarily like helping you get a job. You just have access to so much information that's really, really valuable. And I think the number one thing that I'll say is that if you're going on the journey of trying to understand the job market and trying to understand where you want to go and trying to understand what kind of roles and companies you want to be in, information is your best friend, right? And to be able to access a database of people with their employment history and where they're working at and who they're connecting to and who they're, what they're posting and all of that, that's invaluable, right? So the reason I pay for premium is you can search up an unlimited amount of people. And a lot of time that I spent like figuring out where I wanted to go and like what type of places I wanted to work at and who I potentially wanted to work with was stalking people and seeing like who's worked where, like what have they done, like where are they at in their career now, like you want to gain as much of that information as possible because it helps inform you on like what kind of decision you want to make. Even if you're saying like, okay, like I want to be somewhere in 10 years, find the people that are where you want to be in 10 years, figure out exactly what they did. Start to develop some sort of pattern of like places that make sense to gain that learning. Let me give you a perfect example. Let's say you want to get into you want to get into product at a very specific company, right? You can, or like a very specific program. You want to get into the RPM at Facebook. Go look at what people did before they did the RPM at Facebook. Go look at what schools they're at. Go look at what kind of projects they've done on the side. Build like a comprehensive list of all of that. You have a lot of ideas of what you can do to set yourself up to get there. am I below the bar or any of these things, right? Am I below the bar in the quality of school that I'm going to? Am I below the bar in the type of internships that I've had? Am I below the bar in the extracurricular stuff and type of person and profile the person is? You can benchmark yourself. It really is a way to benchmark yourself against people that are going for or in the same position that you're looking to get into. And I think that's invaluable.
If I'm looking to make a career switch right now, I need to go to LinkedIn. I guess you start with the position you're trying to get to, and then working backwards from there. What did the people that are in this position do to get there?
Yeah.
Right? Now, is part of the process, part of what you do, also reaching out to people and
connecting
with them?
Of course.
How do you, like, I just feel like for me, and I'm sure I speak for some of the audience members here too, is that like reaching out to someone that you don't know on social media is just weird, right? Like,
no, I don't think so.
For me, right? Like, so what is some...
You just gotta get over it. Just gotta slide in people's DMs, bro. You just gotta go and be like, hey, like...
is there, like, what do you... Like, let's say you brought up the Facebook RPM program, right? So let's talk about that, right? You find someone on LinkedIn that you think is pretty similar to your background and can offer you some feedback, some advice for how to get into this. How do you slide into that DM?
So you just say, I mean, I don't think you have to be anything crazy about it. This is what you also need to realize is like the people who you're reaching out to have less time than you do. The worst thing you can do is waste someone's time, right? So get to the point right away. You know, hey, I really liked your background, really interested in the Facebook RPM program. Would love to get advice on how you got there and what you did, and what you can. And yeah, basically, would just love to get advice, blah, blah, blah. Then what I would do is just, again, like be very clear and concise about what you need to know from the person, right? Are you looking for a referral? Are you looking for this person to tell you, tell you what they put on their resume? Are you looking for this person to talk to you about the interview process? Like, be very specific and precise about like what you're asking for, and then go from there.
Okay, so...
But don't, like, overstress it. Like, I think a lot of times people will think that they have to send this, like, template message that will get people to respond. And then once they get the template message, you get them on the phone, and then you ask them all these interesting questions. And then once you ask them all the interesting questions, you do this, and you build a relationship with them. And then after a while, they help you out. I'll be honest, people don't have time for that.
Yeah. I
don't have time. Like, if someone's going to hit me up, and they're going to ask me a bunch of inane questions for 30 minutes before they get to the point of what they want.
What did you say? What kind of questions?
Inane.
Word of the day here. What does that mean?
It just means like mind-numbing. Like, I think it better mean that, because if it doesn't, I'm going to sound so stupid. Hold on, let me look it up.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
So, I mean, you don't want to do that. You want to be genuine to the point and, like, get to it. And also, like, you have to humble yourself and realize it's a numbers game. It doesn't matter what your background is. Doesn't matter who you are. The majority of people are not going to respond to you. It's reality. Like, for you to expect that like 50% of people respond to you, I don't know who you are, but for me, that's not how it worked. I think I sent out like over 100 messages and I got like 10 to 12 responses.
Even that's, I mean, compared to like cold. So I'll give you an example here. I think a lot of people, and this is kind of what held me back when I was reaching out to podcast guests, is like, man, I don't have connections in the beginning, right? And so I finally just started like cold emailing people, and like 90% of people won't respond.
Yeah.
But really, all that matters is like you get that one person.
You're the one person. You get 10 people. That's it.
Yep. And then that opens the door for something else. That opens the door for something else.
100%. You need to just start shooting your shot.
Ooh.
Yeah. I mean,
shoot your shot.
You need to start just.
Safwaan Mir.
Yeah.
2021.
You need to just start reaching out to people. You start asking and not get hung up on. One person not responding, another person responding. I think the advantage right now too is it's a candidates market. So the majority of people who are hiring, or they're trying to hire. But this is what you also have to realize. You connect with one person. Let's say, for example, you want to work at Cheema. What's a company that you want to work at?
I don't want to work at a company.
All right, like, okay, let's
Bad
just
example.
say, let's create hypothetical.
No
Cheema
offense.
wants to work at Amazon.
Yeah, let's say Google. I'm
okay,
already
Google.
working at Amazon.
Yeah,
So let's say Google, right?
Well, Cheema wants to work at Google, and he wants to work in Google in what function?
Chief Executive Officer.
Okay, all right. You're really aiming high there. Let's just say you want to be a PM at Google. You do something as simple as connect with a few PMs at Google on LinkedIn. Maybe you don't even send them a message yet. You just go through, connect with as many of the PMs as you can. Connect with as many of the recruiters as you can as well. What you'll start to see is that on your feed whenever someone says like, I'm hiring PMs for my team, those PMs and those recruiters are the ones liking it. Those PMs and those recruiters are the one posting it. Those PMs and those recruiters are the one commenting on it, right? There you go. Your funnel of information of like who to reach out to, what hiring manager to reach out to has become incredibly clear. What you want to get to is a point where the person that you're reaching out to has a matched need. They're looking for people that have your same talent. So a lot of the times the people that you're connecting with will be like, oh, my team is hiring. If you're interested, please reach out. Oh, or the recruiter will be like, oh, I'm hiring for this position. If you're interested, reach out. So that first person you connect with, that first person you message might eventually lead to that person who you can connect with for the job. I don't think there was a single job that I wanted to apply for that after 3 or 4 messages of people, or maybe like 10 connecting with different people, I didn't find someone who was hiring for that job, or I didn't find someone who was like, yes, I'm looking for people for this job. It really, like, it's a short funnel. You'd be surprised how short that funnel is of people to get to the person who's hiring for the job. And then once you have that, I mean, you can just put your resume right in front of the person hiring for the job. There's no better way to cut through the funnel of this thing. So the way that I really like to think about it, and this is the way that you think about, a lot of kind of any kind of product decision or anything, like what is the funnel to be able to get to what you want, right? So if you're thinking of traditionally, like how most people apply, you send your resume into an online portal. That resume is then amongst thousands of resumes that the recruiters look at. Maybe they don't look at, maybe AWS or whatever system looks at it. They get to the recruiter, then the recruiter looks at a certain amount, then those resumes then get to the hiring manager. The hiring manager says, okay, fine, like we'll interview these people. Then you get into the interview process, right? If you can cut through that whole funnel and get straight to the hiring manager, your rate of success is improved, right? Because at each level of that funnel, the amount of people that get through it is less and less and less and less and less and less, right? So like at that first part, actually like the filter, or like the amount of people that get cut out is the most at the earliest parts of the funnel, right? So like of the people applying online, maybe 1% are actually getting looked at by the recruiter, right? And of the people getting looked at by the recruiter, maybe like 10% of that is getting to the hiring manager, right? So you've you've much increased your odds by cutting through those layers of the funnel, right? So if you're confident that applying online, and you might be in a position where, this is another thing to think about, is a lot of this is there's certain things that are being looked at each level of the funnel, like where did you work previously, how much experience do you have, where did you go to school, what type of role did you have before. If you think that you're already at the top of the funnel on each step, just and I did this too. I shot my application in a bunch of online portals. I think I got like one interview that way, one or two. No, I got a couple of interviews that way. But the majority of my interviews came from reaching out to people directly on LinkedIn, talking to people directly on LinkedIn. Why? Because I could cut through that whole funnel. And again, like with that funnel also comes time. It takes 2 weeks for these applications to get reviewed online before they get to the recruiter, and then a week for that, and then a week for them. It takes forever from when you apply to online to actually getting it. So you might not even coincide with what your timeline is, right? If you want to just cut to the chase and cut to the point and save time, it just makes sense to subvert the line. It's like cutting in line. It's like cutting in line and putting your resume where you want it to be. So it's just a lot more effective. I think I hear a lot of people that are like, bro, I'm applying so much. I just applied to 20 jobs today, blah, blah, blah. And like, I'm not hearing back. It's like, yeah, you're not going to hear back for like 4 weeks. And you might hear back of one from 100, or maybe one from like 300, one from 400. Again, it depends like there's other things in that funnel. How good is your resume? What's your previous experience? How much are you polishing up your things? There's just many, many things that you can do within the process of looking for a job that increases your percentage of success at different levels in that funnel. First thing before anyone does any of this is like make sure your resume is amazing, right? Make sure that you know exactly what you're applying for, and make sure on your resume it's exactly made so that if anyone can look at it in like 15 seconds, they know that like, oh, this guy is looking for this job and this guy has the skills to fulfill this job. Because the majority of people are not looking for your resume for more than 50 seconds. That's a huge thing. The next thing is, again, like if you're using LinkedIn or that kind of thing, make sure your profile is set up for that too, right? That is going to increase your rate of success at any of the levels of these funnel that you want to be at. Then the next thing is to, again, make sure that you actually have, like even before that, is to make sure that you actually have the transferable skills. Like, does it even make sense for you to jump into this role, right? I do, again, think that it is a hot market, so you can kind of overshoot. There's a lot of jobs that I got interviews for that I was not even remotely qualified for. Even if you think about years of experience or that kind of thing. In fact, none of the roles that I interviewed at matched up with my years of experience, except for one. So be ambitious there. There are things that you can be ambitious for, but make sure that you understand where your experience puts you at, and you're setting yourself up best with that experience.
Yeah, I think one thing that I wanted to dive into here is from a brand perspective, right? Like, this is all a game of perception, right?
Yes, and absolutely.
How much there's a few different aspects that you kind of laid out, right? Like your resume, your LinkedIn profile, and then of course like the actual interview process. We can get into that as well. But like, how much weight would you put on each of these things? Like, what is, in your opinion, where should you be focusing the majority of your energy? Based on what you're saying, it sounds like the actual process of getting like networking leads, right? Like, how I'm getting this is that, you know, someone who knows you is much more likely, like if I'm putting my weight behind Safwaan Mir, right? Like, that is a stamp of approval from someone that's already in the company, and I'm like, hey, check this out. You know, let's bring him in, right? So
I actually disagree there. I don't think that really makes that much of a difference in the hiring process.
No, in the reaching out on LinkedIn and stuff?
So again, like, just to clarify, right? If you're trying to get me a job at Amazon.
No, I'm saying I'm hiring.
Oh, you're hiring.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so like, I know Safwaan through LinkedIn. Even it might be a second connection or whatever, right? Like, he reached out.
But again, the 95% of the people that you're reaching out to they're not real connections. Do you know what I mean? It's not people that you've known for years who's like, yeah, Cheema's amazing, I need to hire Cheema.
Yeah, of course.
It's a really soft connection.
So even that soft connection outweighs, I mean, a lot of people are going through this funnel. You're able to cut even with a soft connection.
But the reason that I'm making a caveat there is it's unlikely that you're going to get someone who you make a soft connection with to take a big risk on you. Do you see what I'm saying? So you don't lose the perception that when you make a soft connection with someone, you're making sure that you're viewed, right? Yep. You're increasing your visibility. But if what is being viewed is below par, you're not going to get past the process, right? There again is. So I didn't mean to cut you off in your question, but the way that I'd prioritize it is, number one is your experiences themselves, right? Is what you actually have, like what substantially you have, right? If you went to Harvard and you already are a PM at Google and you've done it for 2 years and you got promoted 2 times, you really don't need to do that much work to get a bunch of interviews. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, the substance is for the market so attractive that it's easy to do you know what I'm saying? Okay. Like, you don't need to do an intense amount of work. You'll get through that filter very, very easily.
Got it.
Right? But so that obviously the most important thing is the experiences, and you can kind of benchmark wherever you think your experiences are, or like how good your experiences are, and whatever you have. The next point is like the very next important point is your resume, right? Because that's what people actually will look at. Like, okay, do we interview this person, right? That's where you have to very clearly tailor your experiences or make your experiences seem as good as possible, right? So that's where the difference is between like someone where they're like, and again, like, this is where brand value goes very far, right? So like, if I see that someone's a PM at Google, I'm like, oh, like, you can do the job, right? You can probably do the job. You can probably do the job at my company. Yeah. Whereas if you don't have that experience, you have to demonstrate that you could do the job. You have to demonstrate that you have the skills to do the job. And to do that is where you have to make that resume very clear and distinctive in showing someone, I can do the job, right? So there's a lot of tips that you can give someone there, but you really want to have it be like evidence-based. Like, what did you do that shows me that you can do the job? You know, what kind of are the coolest experiences that you have on you? What's going to make me want to give you a chance, right? So that's like the very first thing. Like, once you have that, and again, like, I think like I really worked on my resume, and like I think I knew that there was brand value with Capital One and where I worked at and being at Michigan, and that kind of helped out, right? So, but I knew that I was just going to make these things as well represented as possible on my resume. And when I did send my resume, I had like a 90% success rate, right? So I made sure that like my success rate when I got to a level of the funnel was very high. Do you see what I'm saying? Because you could do all the work to get your resume seen by 30 hiring managers, which is a lot, right? That would be a lot of work. But if your success rate then is like 10%, It's going to be tough.
What's the point? Yeah.
What's the point? So you really want to maximize that success rate by focusing on what you can focus on, which is the very first thing is your resume. And if you're in college doing this, make sure your experiences are good, right? You get one big name on your resume, or you get one kind of indication that you can do the work, and it becomes a lot easier. If you're not at that stage, you're trying to get that first gig, you're trying to get that first role, trying to get the validation. That resume is so important because you can now demonstrate that, like, take a chance on me. I have the skills, and like I can very clearly show you I have the skills. Like what I did actually is I found someone who I wanted to do what they were doing, and this was very early in the process. I was actually in the office with you. I was working on my resume like 6 months ago. Yeah, so I found someone who was exactly where I wanted to be. He worked at Goldman, and then he worked at Coinbase, and so I was like, okay, like how did he do that? Like how did he went from investment banking into PM, and I wanted to figure out exactly how he did it. So I was like, okay, can I see your resume? Can I see how you demonstrate your experiences? So I really got to see like, okay, like what made this person attractive to companies, but I got to see exactly what it was. I got to see exactly what he highlighted, exactly how to do it. I kind of built, and I changed my resume based off of that. And I ended up getting way more success after that. So the previous resume that I had wasn't getting nearly as much success when I was just kind of coldly trying to do it. When I did that, and I was like, oh, bang, like, I'm way more confident in what I'm showing the hiring managers, because it's like, oh, like I know what I'm showing them is attractive. So if I can get to them, I can show them something is attractive, I'm going to get the interview, right? So that's the most important thing. You do that before you do anything else. Like make sure your resume is on point, and make sure that like you benchmark it against people who are doing or have done exactly what you want to do, right? Like if you want to get into a certain role, benchmark your resume against people who are in that role, right? Maybe even benchmark your resume against people who have similar experiences to you who've gotten into that role, right? I also reached out to someone who was at Capital One who got into Facebook's RPM, and I looked at what he did and all of that. So I knew kind of like what I needed to do to put myself at that level of like, oh, okay, like this person's attracted enough for us to interview. Because if you don't have that confidence going in, it doesn't matter who you get to, they're gonna be like, oh, this person's not someone we want. It doesn't matter who you talk to. You could talk to literally the hiring manager, and they're gonna be like, oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, that's a really good distinction that you made there. I think as you were saying that, my mind is going to like just the parallels in actually setting up an effective funnel in small business, right? Like, it's one thing to get people on your website, but then it's another thing to get people to convert.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So like you can pay for ads, you can get people on your site, you can give influencers, but that's not necessarily going to convert into sales until what's on your website is actually captivating in it. You communicate the value you provide to the customer.
Exactly.
Right. So it's the same concept there. It's interesting that you mentioned to benchmark yourself against other people. I think small businesses can do the same thing. Just look at other businesses that are doing well in your area,
exactly,
in your industry, and just see what they're saying and how are they communicating the value they provide, and kind of steal a page from their playbook.
Yeah, I mean, this really is personal branding. Like, is your product valuable? Are you valuable as a candidate? Okay, can you then like make the actual advertisement accurately demonstrate the value of your product as efficiently as possible? So you want to work on the actual advertisement and make it really good before you put it in front of anyone, right? Yeah. Then you can work on like, okay, how do I most efficiently get to the right people, to do advertisements?
Targeted. Yeah. It's literally.
So really, and I think LinkedIn is the difference between targeted advertising versus let me just throw flyers everywhere, which is what online applications are. Let me just throw my flyer into people's mailboxes. Like, an online application is just like a company's mailbox, and people are throwing their applications in their mailbox. Do you really want to do that, or do you want to put it directly in front of someone's face? But again, you got to remember the actual advertisement and the actual product have to be good. So once you've set those things, you can kind of focus on that.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to kind of get into here is on the note of having those brands on your resume, right?
Yeah.
Like you kind of touched on this here a little bit. You mentioned, you have Michigan and then your experience at Capital One. I guess let's start with how important is it to have a couple of those and what difference it makes in the actual process? And then for someone that's in college that's looking to get some of that, like let's say I have nothing, right? Like I don't even know what I want to do with my career. How do I start getting those experiences that I can put on my resume and leverage those for more opportunities?
So I'll say that the value of brand is two. One is the general perception that people have of it, and the second is if there's people who have a commonality with that brand that you can connect with. So the first thing I did actually, when I was in my job search, was I looked for people at Capital One who had left, right? I looked for people that had been in my role and they had left. And that was really easy. Like I found a bunch of those hiring managers, and I think I had like a 95% success rate with those people. Why? Because they knew exactly what type of work I did. They knew exactly that, like, my promotion schedule and everything demonstrated that I did good work. And once I reached out to them, they were like, oh yes, definitely. We love people from Capital One. We would love.
That's what the recruiter sounds like.
No, it wasn't recruiters. It was hiring managers. Yeah. They were excited. They were all excited to. Those were the earliest interviews I got, and they were easy. And actually, like, I got interviews for stuff that I wasn't qualified for. So, like, one of the people that I hired had moved. He was a vice president at Capital One, moved to another company, and he was hiring for senior product managers. So it's like 8 years of experience. To reach out to him, I was like, oh, I'm interested. Blah blah blah. He's like, okay, like, reach out to the recruiter. You'll be set up tomorrow. And why? Because it's really from Capital One. Again, there's like another 2 or 3 people. They were all like, oh, okay, like, we love Capital One people. Love to get you in. So that was the easiest funnel to get in, right? And so again, like, you have to remember that works with companies really, really well. Like, if you have alumni from companies that you're working with, or people that are hiring that are directly in the company, they know your work directly. They know what you're doing. They know exactly who you are. So it's super easy to reach out to them. With schools, it's a little bit less impactful, but still impactful. If you reach out to, like, a fellow U of M alumni, or I went to Wayne State too, a fellow Wayne State alumni, that's a good place to connect. And again, that goes to, like, how much camaraderie there actually is in the school, and like how much people are wanting to help you because you went to the same school with them. It's a little bit different because, like, just because I went to U of M doesn't mean that I know how good someone is in certain major versus how good someone is in certain. It's a different process, right? It's a very different type of understanding of people's capabilities and stuff like that. But that has helped too. Like, one of the other people that I reached out to, a bunch of the people that I reached out to for referrals were just people from Michigan, and they were willing to do that. And again, I think that's a benefit of going to some of these schools that are, higher ranked, or, more well respected in, the corporate world, is there's a lot more people that are willing to help you. Those people are willing to go out of their way to help you. And then the next thing is the general perception of that degree is better. Like, if you look at someone who got a 4.0 in physics at Harvard, you're like, oh, they're probably pretty capable of doing the job. They've been through, again, it's a funnel thing, right? They've been through enough funnels and been at the top of enough funnels that it looks like I can, move them top of this funnel. So that's something to think about. That's something that is definitely, you want to, recognize. But again, like, if you don't have those things, it doesn't mean like, oh, you're screwed or you can't do anything. Those things, again, just make it easier, right? Makes you have to deal with less BS to get to where you want to get to, right? Because you have to deal with the BS of getting into a really good school and getting a good GPA and doing all those things. It then subverts you from having to deal with more BS when you're trying to get through this one. Like, if you don't have those things, you now have to be more creative. You have to be like, okay, like, I'm going to have a lower success rate on these messages that I, send out to people objectively. So I'm going to have to send a lot more messages. I'm going to have to do a lot more of this network. I'm going to have to work harder to get someone to give me a chance. It's just the way that things work. But again, like, once you get that first thing on your resume, once you get that first thing that kind of validates you, you're kind of in a good place. So, like, this, where you go to school matters more the earlier you are in your career. But for example, you get into, and you can testify to this too, I can testify to this, you can do a Capital One, you can do an Amazon. It doesn't really matter that much how many where you went to school. It just matters where you benchmark compared to your peers, right? And that kind of, the thing that people look at is your most recent brand, your most recent thing that is on your resume, because it already demonstrates to people that, like, this person has successfully been through the funnel at one level, and so now they're at the same level as those other people. It doesn't really matter what they did before it, right? So
yeah, one thing that you keep highlighting, and I want to make sure the audience is getting this, is that brand is shortcut for decision making.
Yes.
Right? So, like, one thing that Safwaan mentioned is, like, if I'm hiring and I have a PM that went to Google, I'm like, I don't have to do my due diligence as much. I'm like, okay, if Google trusts him to do the job,
yeah,
he could probably do the job for me too.
Which
right?
is the same thing for schools too. That's why people care so much. And, like, in the business world, it's such a big deal where you went to school, because it's like, okay, like, it's harder to get into Harvard than it is to get into Wayne State. Again, like, I went to Wayne State, so I'm not cooking on Wayne State, but it's harder to get into Harvard than it is getting to Wayne State. I'm not gonna do the work to like really understand how capable this candidate is. That's a good indication that I can. And that's the thing, that we as human beings, we make shortcuts to figure out how capable another human being is, and a lot of that comes down to brand value of like where they went to school or what they did or blah blah blah. And that's again why like people look at your resume in less than 15 seconds, and so a lot of times they're just looking at brand. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm just, like I know because I've done resume reviews, and once you see like 500 resumes in front of you, you're really just looking for where they go to school, what's their GPA, where did they do their internship. Okay, do I have to do more research? There better be something in here that's like crazy. Okay, and then again, you're grading. And when you get a bunch of resumes, you're benchmarking people against other people, right? Two identical candidates, one who went to a better school, is gonna have an edge. It's just how it works. I think people don't like hearing it a lot of times, but it's just that's first-hand experience. That's how things work in the way this in the business, I guess, recruiting world.
Yeah, no. I think like the reality is that we're making these decisions all the time, not just for like recruiting, but like, I mean, this is what this podcast is about, right? Like,
yeah.
So we can get into that, listen to some of our other episodes, but like we are making these decisions based on, what we believe is going to be the right decision, right?
Yeah.
And so that's not always right. So for the people that are listening, don't necessarily have that brand value attached to your resume. Like, it doesn't mean that you can't do something.
Exactly.
Right? Like, it doesn't
don't
mean
get
you're not
discouraged.
capable.
Yeah.
But what it does mean is that you have to understand, like, where the people that are the gatekeepers are.
Yes.
Like, their perspective, right? And once you understand their perspective, then you can work at, okay, how do I demonstrate my value to them, right? It's a different marketing strategy that you have to take, right? Like, for example, if we're bringing it back to small businesses, if I have a small business and I've done client work for Fortune 500 companies, I can just put that stuff on my website.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'll have a very, like, I'll probably have a steady stream of clients coming in, right?
Exactly.
Whereas if I'm trying to start something up from the ground and I don't have any big clients yet, right? Now I got to do some extra work to figure out how I communicate my value to the people that I want to work with.
Yep.
And convince them to trust their hard-earned money on this service that I'm providing. So it's just a different game, and I think it's definitely important to understand that if you don't have that experience, there is still ways to kind of get through that. And of course, again, it becomes a numbers game because there's so many applicants, right? Everyone's trying for the same jobs. Even these people that went to these top schools are applying the same things and stuff like that.
And I'll say I made that decision when I was at Wayne State too. I was a senior. I was like, okay, like maybe I can start to try and recruit for consulting right now. It's like, objectively, it doesn't make sense. None of these companies recruit at Wayne State. None of them come here. None of the places that I want to work at are going to come here. I need to go somewhere where the brand value is good enough that those companies will even consider me. And that's why I did like the 1-year master's in Michigan. It was really just to get my name in front of companies that I wanted to work at, right? So when I was there, like the McKinsey, Bain, BCGs, Capital One wasn't recruiting at Wayne State. There was like a very limited select list of schools that they were recruiting at. And so for me, it was just like, okay, this is a shortcut to get to where I want to get to. And so I think you have to realize that like you gotta make some of those jumps, right? But like you make one of those jumps, then the next jump becomes easier, right? I think you can attest to it's a lot easier for you to get interviews at companies you want to work at with Amazon on your resume than if you had nothing on your resume.
Yeah, I don't do any of the stuff that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I just go through the online portals.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that, that second piece that you mentioned, right? Like that is the passive, it's not passive necessarily, but that's kind of like the passive way of just kind of trying to make it to the top of the funnel. The second piece you mentioned is the active ways, like you still find something, find like a shared experience you have. You can still take control of your career.
Yeah.
And take control of the brand perception you have by creating conversations and connections with people, right? And I think that's super important to highlight here.
So yeah, all of the tactics that I'm sharing are just increasing your percentage rate of success compared to other candidates with your same level of experience, right? So if I'm benchmarking myself against people that have similar experiences to me and I do what Safwaan is telling me to do, I'm gonna have more success than all of those people, likely, right? So that's just putting me ahead of people at my same level, and then utilizing that over time is gonna help you move up, a lot more quickly in terms of what you're trying to do in the job search.
Awesome. Yeah, I think there's a lot that was covered in here, and I think there's a lot of value for not just for people that are trying to apply for jobs, making career switches and stuff like that, and even just sliding into the DMs on LinkedIn. So
yeah.
Appreciate you coming on, man. I know I gave you a little bit of a hard time. So,
No.
Thanks.
I'm honored.
So I found an article that says for an average online job posting, 1,000 individuals will see the job post, 200 will begin the application process, 100 will complete the application, 75 of those 100 resumes will be screened out by either the ATS or a recruiter, 25 will be seen by the hiring manager, 4 to 6 will be invited for an interview, 1 to 3 of them will be invited back for a final interview, 1 will be offered that job, and 80% of those receiving an offer will accept it. I thought that was crazy. I know a lot of times we have a negative connotation about skipping the line, but in this analogy, I think it is really worth it to take Safwaan's advice and skip the line. Now, as always, I have my key takeaways from this episode, but before we get into that, I want to share a clip with you from our episode with Chris Blauvelt on Launch Good.
Why should someone use your company, your platform, versus one of the established players out there? And there's always going to be an opportunity when it comes to personalized service. It's not scalable, at least early on, but that's okay, right? Because one of those other kind of aphorisms of Paul Graham is do things that don't scale. Early on, do things that don't scale. You know, and it doesn't last forever. Like, you know, Brian doesn't still take photographs of people's apartments, right? But you know what they have done for Airbnb? They've set up a whole network of photographers that if you're listing your place on Airbnb, it's really easy to find a photographer in your location that can do the photographs for like, you know, a couple $100. And this is what they do, right? And so you'll find those opportunities to scale if you've created something of value.
If you enjoyed this discussion with Safwaan, I am sure you will enjoy the discussion with Chris. Check it out wherever you're listening to this episode. It is episode number 28. Now, here are my key takeaways. Number 1, start shooting your shot. Find people in the positions you want to be in and figure out what you need to do to get there. And number 2, your resume gets looked at for less than 15 seconds. Having brands that are big in the industry on your resume will help you increase your perceived value in the eyes of the recruiters. If you don't have brand names on your resume, it's not a lost cause. It just means you have to employ a different marketing strategy. And that is all for this episode. If you enjoyed this discussion, please consider leaving a review and sharing with a friend. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.